48 years after his assassination, the legacy of President John F. Kennedy remains shrouded in mystery and controversy. But one aspect of JFK's presidency that has largely been forgotten is his Executive Order 111110, signed on June 4, 1963. This order, which authorized the Treasury to issue silver certificates backed by silver bullion, was a bold attempt to reform America's monetary system and challenge the power of the Federal Reserve. At the time, many Americans were concerned about the growing influence of the Fed, which had been created in 1913 to stabilize the banking system after a series of financial panics. But over the years, the Fed had become increasingly powerful, controlling the money supply and setting interest rates without much oversight or accountability. JFK's order was seen as a direct challenge to the Fed's authority, as it allowed the Treasury to issue its own currency backed by silver, rather than relying on the Fed's fiat money. The president had long been skeptical of the Federal Reserve System, and he believed that returning to a silver-backed currency would help reduce inflation and promote economic growth. But JFK's order was more than just an economic reform, it was also a political statement. By taking control of the money supply away from the Fed, JFK was asserting his authority as president and challenging the entrenched power structures of Washington. This move earned him both praise and criticism, with some calling him a hero for standing up to the banks, while others accused him of pandering to populist sentiment. Tragically, JFK's time in office was cut short just months after signing Executive Order 111110. But his legacy lived on, inspiring a new generation of reformers who saw in his actions a model for challenging the power of the Fed and reclaiming control over America's financial system. In this documentary, we will explore the story behind JFK's Executive Order 111110, its original purpose, and its enduring legacy. We will delve into the complex world of finance and politics, shedding light on a forgotten chapter in American history that has important implications for our future. So join us as we follow the money trail and uncover the truths about JFK's silver certificate conspiracy. In the early 1960s, the United States Federal Reserve, a privately owned institution, held an unprecedented and largely unchecked amount of power over the nation's monetary policy. This opaque organization, responsible for managing the country's money supply, had become a dominant force in the American financial landscape, often collaborating closely with the government, but ultimately acting in its own interests. The Federal Reserve's influence was so pervasive that it drew the attention of President John F. Kennedy, who, upon taking office in 1961, began exploring ways to limit the institution's control over the nation's currency and economy. In a bold move, JFK issued Executive Order 111110 on June 4, 1963, effectively allowing the Treasury Department to issue silver certificates, a type of paper currency backed by physical silver bullion, thus circumventing the Federal Reserve's role in printing money. This order represented a significant shift in financial policy and harkened back to a time when the government maintained more direct control over its currency. In fact, prior to 1963, silver certificates had been widely used by the public as a means of exchange, with each certificate entitling its bearer to redeem it for an actual piece of silver. However, JFK's order threatened the status quo and sparked outrage among those who saw it as an encroachment on the Federal Reserve's authority. The president's actions raised questions about the extent of the Fed's power and whether a central bank, owned and operated by private interests, should hold such sway over public policy. Despite the controversy surrounding Executive Order 111110, it remained in effect until President Lyndon B. Johnson's administration revoked it in 1964, a mere 10 months after JFK's assassination. The order's sudden termination has led some to speculate about a possible connection between the silver certificate conspiracy and JFK's untimely death, suggesting that powerful financial interests may have played a role in his demise. As we continue our investigation into JFK's Executive Order 11111 and its implications for American finance and politics, we must examine the forces at play during this critical juncture in our nation's history, forces that have shaped our financial system and left a lasting impact on our democracy. Delving deeper into our investigation, we encounter a fascinating aspect of American currency history: silver certificates. These certificates were once as common as dollar bills, serving as redeemable claims for actual silver held in U.S. Treasury vaults. To understand their significance, let's revisit the late 19th and early 20th centuries when citizens could exchange these certificates for silver dollars, or even silver bullion, at face value. Silver certificates gained prominence with the passage of the Sherman Silver Purchase Act of 1890, which required the U.S. government to buy millions of ounces of silver annually. This act increased the silver supply and led to inflation as more money entered circulation. However, its repeal in 1893 ended the free coinage of silver and caused deflation, making silver certificates less appealing for transactions due to their fixed value. Fast forward to John F. Kennedy's presidency, where Executive Order 1111 rekindled interest in silver certificates. Signed on June 4, 1963, this order authorized the Secretary of the Treasury to issue silver certificates in larger denominations, up to $100, to facilitate redemption and ease transactions involving substantial sums of money. However, JFK's untimely death just months later left many questions unanswered about his true intentions regarding this executive order. Some theorize that he sought to diminish the influence of private Federal Reserve Bank by increasing the circulation of silver certificates, thereby reducing dependency on Federal Reserve notes. This notion aligns with JFK's broader skepticism towards centralized financial power and his desire to return control over money creation to the American public. Despite these intriguing possibilities, it is essential to acknowledge that no definitive evidence has surfaced implicating any conspiracies surrounding Executive Order 1111 or silver certificates. Nonetheless, their place in American currency history remains significant, as relics of a time when paper money represented tangible assets and as reminders of the enduring tension between public and private control over our nation's finances. As we delve deeper into the story of JFK's Executive Order 111110, it's crucial to understand its implications on silver certificates, a type of paper currency backed by physical silver. This order, signed on June 4, 1963, aimed to transfer authority over these certificates from the Federal Reserve System back to the Treasury Department. To comprehend the significance of this move, let's revisit some financial history. Prior to 1963, anyone could exchange a silver certificate for an equivalent amount of silver bullion at the U.S. Treasury. However, with Executive Order 10989, issued by President Eisenhower in 1951, this right was removed for certificates with a face value over 100. When JFK signed Executive Order 111110, he sought to restore this privilege fully, effectively challenging the Federal Reserve's role as intermediary. It's important to note that while the order didn't explicitly abolish the Fed's power, it did authorize the Treasury to issue silver certificates again, a potential threat to the Fed's control over currency conversion and circulation. This shift could have meant more public control over money supply, potentially reducing dependence on banks and interest rates set by the Federal Open Market Committee. However, less than 6 months after signing the order, President Kennedy was assassinated. Subsequently, his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, never utilized the powers granted by Executive Order 1111. Instead, he pursued different financial policies, including the eventual end of silver backing for U.S. currency in 1968. Today, remaining silver certificates are collector's items, valued not for their monetary worth, but for their historical significance. They serve as reminders of a time when paper money represented tangible assets and underscore the enduring tension between public and private control over our nation's finances. While no definitive evidence points to a conspiracy surrounding Executive Order 111110 or silver certificates, their place in American currency history remains significant. They represent a moment when a president dared to challenge the status quo, raising questions about public versus private control of our financial system that continue to resonate today. The issuance of Executive Order 111110 sent shockwaves through the Federal Reserve System, a private institution that had enjoyed unrivaled control over America's monetary policy since its inception in 1913. This order threatened to dilute their influence by allowing silver certificates to be redeemed for both silver and United States notes, which were issued directly by the Treasury Department, bypassing the Federal Reserve's control over the money supply. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York, one of the 12 regional banks in the system, expressed concern about this new development. In a letter dated June 28, 1963, they wrote to the Secretary of the Treasury, CC threatened to dilute the bulting the Federal Reserve's control over the Treasury debalting the Douglas Dillon, expressing their apprehension regarding JFK's order and its potential implications for the nation's financial stability. They argued that such actions could lead to inflationary pressures and destabilize the economy. However, others saw Executive Order 111110 as a long overdue check on the Federal Reserve's power. Congressman Wright Patman, chairman of the House Committee on Banking and Currency, was an outspoken critic of the Fed's privileged position. As early as 1957, he introduced legislation aimed at limiting the Federal Reserve's autonomy and enhancing congressional oversight. Despite these challenges to their authority, the Federal Reserve managed to maintain its dominance over American finance. After JFK's assassination, President Lyndon B. Johnson did not pursue his predecessor's policies regarding silver certificates or United States notes. Over time, the use of both declined dramatically, and by 1968, the Treasury had ceased issuing new silver certificates altogether. Today, less than $50 million worth of circulating currency consists of silver certificates, while Federal Reserve notes dominate the market with over $2 trillion in circulation. The power dynamics between public and private control of our financial system remain a contentious issue, with proponents of reform pointing to Executive Order 111110 as evidence that alternative monetary policies should be considered. Yet, despite periodic calls for change, the Federal Reserve's grip on America's financial machinery remains firm, its position seemingly impervious to presidents and executive orders alike. 1963 was a pivotal year for many reasons, not least of which was the tragic assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22 in Dallas, Texas. The Warren Commission's report concluded that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in shooting JFK from the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository building. However, the circumstances surrounding JFK's death and certain executive actions he took before his untimely demise continue to raise questions among researchers and historians. One such executive order is 11-1110, signed by President Kennedy on June 4, 1963, which amended Executive Order 1011 issued by President Eisenhower. This seemingly mundane administrative change granted the Secretary of the Treasury the power to issue silver certificates upon the request of any Federal Reserve Bank. On its face, this may appear as an insignificant bureaucratic shift, but understanding the context of America's monetary system at that time sheds light on why some view it as a potential challenge to the dominance of the Federal Reserve. Throughout much of our nation's history, silver certificates served as a form of paper currency backed by physical silver stored in government vaults, effectively tying the value of money to a tangible commodity rather than relying solely on the fiat authority of central banks. By empowering the Treasury Secretary to issue these certificates at the behest of any Federal Reserve Bank, JFK arguably created an avenue for circumventing the traditional control wielded by the Federal Reserve over the money supply. Less than 6 months after signing Executive Order 11-1110, President Kennedy was assassinated under circumstances that remain shrouded in mystery. Some conspiracy theorists point to this executive order as evidence of a plot to silence JFK due to his perceived threat to the status quo maintained by powerful financial interests. While such claims are difficult to prove conclusively, they serve as a reminder that even seemingly innocuous administrative actions can have far-reaching implications, particularly when viewed through the lens of history and power dynamics. In our next segment, we'll delve deeper into the world of silver certificates and explore their role in America's monetary system during the mid-20th century, as well as the potential ramifications of Executive Order 11-1110 on modern financial policy debates. Stay tuned for The Money Trail. In this segment of The Money Trail, we explore a curious question if Executive Order 11-1110, signed by President John F. Kennedy on June 4, 1963, had such far-reaching implications, why didn't subsequent presidents take further action to implement it? Executive Order 11-1110 authorized the Secretary of the Treasury to issue silver certificates in response to public demand, effectively allowing citizens to exchange paper money for silver at a fixed rate. Kennedy's order seemed to challenge the Federal Reserve System, which had been responsible for issuing the nation's currency since its creation in 1913. Yet, despite the potential power contained within Executive Order 11-1110, no president after JFK chose to officially expand or enforce this policy. Even Lyndon B. Johnson, who succeeded Kennedy after his assassination, made no moves to capitalize on the order's potential. One possible explanation is that while Executive Order 11-1110 indeed challenged the Federal Reserve System, it did not fundamentally alter the status quo. Silver certificates still represented a form of fiat currency paper notes backed by the government's promise to pay, rather than by a physical commodity like silver or gold. Thus, subsequent presidents may have seen little practical value in pursuing this policy. Another factor could be political considerations. As the power and influence of the Federal Reserve became more entrenched over time, any attempt to challenge its authority might have faced significant resistance from both within and outside the government. Furthermore, as global financial systems grew increasingly interconnected, the potential risks and uncertainties associated with such a move may have outweighed any perceived benefits. Regardless of the reasons behind their inaction, one thing remains clear. The presidents who followed Kennedy did not embrace Executive Order 11-1110 as a means to reshape America's monetary system. Instead, they allowed it to languish, relegating it to a footnote in financial history. As we continue our journey down the money trail, we'll uncover more clues about the role of silver certificates and Executive Order 11-1110 in shaping modern financial policy debates. Stay tuned for our next segment as we delve deeper into the world of monetary policy and the enduring legacy of JFK's controversial executive action. Listeners, as we reach the end of our investigation, let's recap what we've uncovered about JFK's Executive Order 11-1110 and its implications for financial history. Our journey has taken us down the money trail, unearthing hidden stories that significantly impacted monetary policy and the role of silver certificates. President John F. Kennedy issued Executive Order 11-1110 on June 4, 1963, directing the Treasury to issue silver certificates redeemable in silver bullion. This order aimed to increase public access to silver and challenge the Federal Reserve's monopoly over currency issuance. However, after Kennedy's assassination, his successor Lyndon B. Johnson did not aggressively pursue this policy, allowing it to languish and fade into obscurity. The Treasury gradually phased out silver certificates, replacing them with Federal Reserve notes. One cannot help but wonder what might have been if Kennedy's vision for a more accessible and decentralized currency system had been realized. Would we see less concentration of wealth and power in the hands of banking institutions? It is impossible to say for sure. What remains undeniable, though, is that JFK's Executive Order 11-1110 sparked a crucial debate about monetary policy and transparency. This debate has endured throughout financial history, influencing modern discussions on cryptocurrencies, central bank digital currencies, and the ever-evolving role of money in society. As we conclude our investigation, let us remember that the power to shape financial policy lies not just with governments and institutions, but also with the people who demand accountability, transparency, and accessibility from those in power. Thank you for joining The Money Trail. We hope this journey has inspired you to ask questions, seek answers, and continue exploring the complex world of financial history. Stay tuned as we uncover more hidden stories and controversial decisions that have shaped our present and will undoubtedly influence our future.